All right. We don't have any props.
Today, we finally share our opinions about 5-piece bolts, and we've got 40 plus tests to back it up.
Start it up.
This is a 5-piece bolt, and that is what we're going to talk about in today's episode. This is in a block of epoxy, and we will be giving this away to somebody who opens up their email in the month of September. For those who opened up all 4 Saturdays emails, you will be entered in 4 times. We really just want to be able to tell you that we have helpful bolt information because you can only clickbait this so much. The welcome email that you get will have the bolting Bible in the PDF format. We also have a short film about us doing a project in a missile silo that was pretty cool. I also have 2 private videos in there that talk about the big secret I've been working on the last few months and why EG no longer supports me. Please do not buy gear from me, extremegear.org, if you want to support what we're doing here at How Not To. We are no longer affiliated. If you want to go find out why, sign up for the emails.
So these are commonly referred to as a 5-piece, which I have no idea why. I believe they were originally made by Rawl, and then by Powers, and now by DeWalt, and they're sold under the name Powerbolt.
So these are both 304 stainless steel, and you can see there's a size difference. Let's count how many pieces there are. The bolt is 1. Crush washer is number 2. The big washer is number 3. The top sleeve is number 4. The plastic spacer is number 5. The sleeve part of the sleeve bolt, number 6. Cone is number 7. And the blue tab at the bottom, number 8. Where these things supposedly shine is when you are in softer rock. This will give a little bit more contact area to the rock. It's the bolts, all these bolts that we ever test are strong enough, but it's how they engage with the rock and if the rock's strong enough. And this wing that spreads out when the nut gets sucked into it is going to create more contact and is going to engage better than a wedge bolt that only has these 2 nubs on here as the cone at the bottom is sucking up through it.
To be clear, we feel these are great for really hard rock.
And you'll see what we got in our tests, because even a short bolt in good rock, we were able to pull it out, albeit some pretty high forces. But it didn't shine in these tests as much, but that's not our issue with them. What is our issue with them?
It's a long list, and this is based on you and I having installed probably between 150 and 200 together.
And how many have you uninstalled?
Over 100, maybe close to 200 replaced.
Talk about the installing part of it.
Installing, there's this little piece here that serves a purpose, but it falls off on many bolts. And if this nut is not in the right place, say it's too engaged, you can screw it up when you're installing.
Because the wings are already too overly expanded.
Most people installing these, they'll put them in a bag and they'll rattle around in that bag and come loose and you'll lose pieces. Okay. Once this is gone, everything falls off, and if you're not really careful, you can put stuff on in the wrong order.
The one thing I really like about these, before we beat them up for the next 20-30 minutes, is that the head is flush. So when you tension up a wedge bolt, especially if it's not engaging right away, this thing can stick out further and further and further, getting in the way of the carabiner, and I just don't like the fact it sticks out. This is flush the whole time.
But that's also a problem because you can't see what's going on with the nut. And when these become spinners, the hanger spinning can continue to spin this, and if the climber's not inspecting it close, just done a pumpy crux, clipped it and go on to the next bolt, this can keep unspinning, and then when it does, the whole bolt comes out. I see this all the time on mountain project comments. The bolt came out today, we just left it at the bottom of the route. And that's a problem. Like, nobody's died yet because of that I know of.
That would give me gear fear.
Yeah. Our whole thing on How Not To is we show you lots of stuff in hopes that you'll be more aware of the gear that you're trusting and inspect stuff and know how to inspect stuff properly. But for those who don't, I feel like that's not a great design.
When bolts have to be replaced someday, a wedge bolt can be easier to remove.
Absolutely.
Because you can attach to those threads with an adapter and you can extract it out. With a Powerbolt, you can remove the head. You can remove the head in the hanger. You can technically just fill the hole. But if we want to reuse the hole so we don't turn our rocks into Swiss cheese, this sleeve is rusted against the side of the walls. It's thinner, it's crumbly, and the nut at the bottom is very hard to get anything into it in order to extract it out.
How many of these have you removed?
Removed successfully?
I guess, however you want to measure it.
Probably 20, and I probably averaged an hour to 2 hours for each one because it is quite hard to remove this thin little thing on the non-stainless version. It's very thin, very rusty, and it just comes apart every time you try to get purchase on there and remove it.
I spent all day once removing 4 bolts that I put in that were plated steel. Removed them because I found out plated steel was not going to last forever, and I put in glue-ins. Freaking nightmare. I reused the holes. I made it happen, but it was all day. And we got to think about maintenance. And these suck for that. Quick rant. One of the biggest frustrations that led me to start the Bolting Bible was that I bought 5-piece Powerbolts, zinc plated, because I didn't know better. And after doing a bunch of research, well, that we put it together as the Bolting Bible. Zinc plated bolts will not last long enough outside. Powerbolt themselves says the zinc plated bolts are an indoor product. Now, I love a lot of what Fix sells, but they still sell the zinc plated bolts. And as you can see on their website, it is substantially cheaper than the stainless. So if you don't know any better, that's real tempting to buy those. Now, I called them and asked them why, and they have industrial customers that buy them for temporary uses. That makes a lot more sense. But that's not what you should use. And it should have even bigger disclaimers, even though they have finally put disclaimers on the website. If you are going to take the time, money, and energy, please put in something that will last longer than you. And if it's expensive, if you're creative enough to go up a rock and put them in, you are probably creative enough to get some of your friends to help donate, bringing the cost per bolt down quite a bit. Also, you don't necessarily need to use those bolts. Anyways, I couldn't sleep at night unless I made sure you knew, don't buy those zinc-plated power bolts. This is what we got in our brake test. We'll start with a 1/2 inch.
We tested these in granite. These are the plated steel version. We were curious about their strength. They were super strong. We were using Fix stainless hangers.
Don't mix metals, but when you're breaking stuff, it doesn't matter.
The hangers were breaking at almost 50 kilonewtons.
In granite, the big, fat, long power bolts that are used in climbing were breaking the hangers all 3 times when pulled in shear at 49, 50, and 49 kilonewtons. And when we pulled them in tension, the hanger also broke at 47, 47, and 42 kilonewtons. Then we tested them in sandstone. In tension, it's pretty interesting because the hanger was slipping off. This is a 1/2 inch bolt, but if you use a 1/2 inch hole hanger, it's sitting on the outside of the sleeve. When if you use a 3/8 hole hanger, then it will sit underneath the washer better.
Powerbolt Plus or PS, it's a much thinner washer than the stainless version.
Now, to give you the best information, Fix website points to the Stanley Black & Decker instructions that says you should use a 1/2 inch hanger with a 1/2 inch bolt, that you want the sleeve to be up above the rock or concrete and inside of the hanger for proper torque specs. I think this last part is hilarious. We have investigated testing in rock, as rock climbing is a common applications for these bolts. But due to the variability in rock, we decided not to pursue it further. You're welcome. I'm gonna go finish this edit now so you don't have to. And then the last one did something weird. And then it did pull out like an inch. Granted, it's almost, what, 10,000 pounds? Now, you're supposed to use longer bolts when the rock is softer. And I love doing things you're not supposed to, hence how not to. So I used the short 2.75 inch 304 stainless steel in tension, and the rock did fail. That really screwed up like my other tests. I didn't know it was gonna break the rock like that. And then, so I spaced these bolts out roughly what you would have when you're climbing at an anchor. It compromised my other bolt placement a little bit. But either way, the rock was failing. So the MBS of Wingate sandstone with a short bolt is 15 to 24 kilonewtons.
So if you're bolting in a roof, these are probably not your best bet.
So 1/2 inch bolts are a super bomber. No question about it. Even if they rust, they're gonna be bomber a long time. It's a bitch to replace. 3/8 is what I'm really curious about. So we actually did quite a few tests here. In granite, we tested the 2.25 inch or the short 3/8 bolt, and we put a hanger on there, and we were pulling in shear, and the hanger broke, and we were determined to break this damn thing. So we put a new hanger on there, and we were able to snap the bolt almost twice as strong as a carabiner.
And then we got a very similar result at 36 kilonewtons, and then we decided, well, let's see what happens if you don't apply any torque at all. And we still got above 20.
Didn't wrench it down at all. Now we have other tests to show you should do that, but we just like to know what happens if somebody doesn't tighten it properly. Well, in that case, it was super good enough. Probably cyclically, if you're loading it, you could probably work it out. But that's all.
It's more likely to unspin if you haven't tightened it at all.
So you're supposed to use longer bolts, so we tested longer 3/8 inch bolts. We had the hanger actually break when we pulled it in shear at 34.74 kilonewtons. And these are the stainless ones that you would actually install in the rock, not the plated steel ones. So the next one, we were lucky that the hanger didn't break, so we could actually see what the bolt breaks at. That's pretty high considering it's a 5/16 stud and surrounded by a sleeve. Whoa, 2/14 sheared out?
So if you don't drill your hole deep enough, Ryan, it is very hard to fix this because you can't get it back out at that point. So
to drill
always
it
check
deeper.
your holes to make sure they're deep enough.
And what happens if you do that?
Yeah.
It's sticking up quite a bit. It's a slop crap job. Basically, you would have to pull the stud out, chuck the bolt, and drill an entirely different hole. This ripped the bolt out, which means there's still 3 inches of bolt in the rock, but not being flush, kind of like deformed it. I mean, it's literally snaking out of there. Pulled out really
Yes.
low.
So that's like half the force.
And it's more than halfway in. So pulling these longer 3/8 in tension in the sandstone, it pulled out a little bit, but it snapped the head off first.
As opposed to massive rock failure.
Yeah, the head snapped on all of them, all around the same force. That was very consistent, actually. But you can see that it's how it holds the rock is what we care about, not really the strength of the metal. Your nylon rope is not going to break almost any bolt. It's just how it's attached.
This is one of the few things that we've actually confirmed on how not to.
Everything else is a myth.
Oh, you need to clean your glue-in hole super well or the bolt will fail.
Or you need to torque it just right.
Yeah, like none of that we've really seen happen. But soft rock, make sure your bolts are longer and deeper.
So we want to know how much torque played a role in how well this stuff performed. And the concrete in my backyard that I had at the time is representative of, let's say, a softer rock because I installed it. It was 14.94 when it catastrophically broke the concrete with 100% of what they said it was supposed to be.
Which is not too different from the sandstone results with these same bolts.
When we didn't tighten it at all, it literally just pulled it out.
At almost 3 kilonewtons.
At a lot. You're not pulling it out.
Just sitting on it.
Just sitting on it. Unless you cyclically do it. Because if you take something and you pull on it a bunch, it's going to work itself out. Tighten your bolts. What happens if you only tighten it 50%?
We got a higher result than 100%.
It just happened to be higher. It doesn't mean it's correct. What happens if you over tighten the rock? And what happens if you put twice as much force on that nut? That sounds really
that
bad.
bolt.
A concern is over tightening the bolt because you could compromise it. So what happens if you do take it to twice as much as the spec says?
Concrete still fails at a similar result.
What if you really over tighten it and do it at 4 times more than you're supposed to?
Concrete still fails.
Albeit it was a lower force.
Because we compromised the concrete with the other tests so much.
But it didn't just snap the bolts like some people may have thought.
Yeah.
It's not good to over crank a bolt, but you can actually mitigate that by just not taking a wrench that's too big. Test it at home to find out what your torque is with a specific wrench. Then you can just go out in the wild and you'll get within the range of what you need.
Our thought is there's quite a range that's acceptable, and that's kind of backed up by how DeWalt chooses to present these instructions. They have the little tiny number somewhere that if you look, it says it in foot-pounds, and then what everybody's going to read with pictures up top, 14-point font, they have turn it finger tight, and then 3.5 turns after that.
I was bolting a rock in Iceland after we dug and couldn't dig anymore. Dead Man was a rock under the ground. We're like, let's just bolt that. And we tensioning the bolt, and tensioning the bolt, and tensioning, and it never got tight because the rock was fracturing behind it. If you're not getting a tight bolt, there's something wrong with your rock or your bolt. Yeah, there's things that could be wrong.
like-
you forgot to put your nut on. And then the next one.
Still more? There's so many of these.
I know. I'm going to edit this tight. And it'll only be 45 minutes.
But this doesn't have the washer on it. And you can see here that there's space between the bolt head and the hole.
1/2-inch hanger on a 3/8 bolt. It pulled it out a little bit before coming off. What was the #1 comment on that?
Where's your washer? You should use a washer. Washer. Duh.
That was what we were testing.
Yeah.
Thanks, guys. So I wanted to see if there was a big difference with the washer, and we did it again, and the rock cracked. And we got 14.5 kilonewtons, but then it just kind of oozed out of the rock because it was blasted limestone. Oh, that's cool. If the rock you're climbing has a lot of fractures, this is something you might run across. So be mindful of fractures in rocks because this could happen.
So these are Powerbolt Plus. So this is a redesign of the traditional 5-piece Powerbolt. We don't think you should use these for climbing, mainly because they're not stainless and they're weak.
And we want to see how weak. And in tension, this thing popped out at 5.34 kilonewtons. And the
Pretty terrible.
We did it again with a longer bolt, and we were able to get 21.46.
Wow, good thing we got a graph because we wouldn't have known it went up and then down.
However, when we tested these short guys in tension, pulling them straight out, and yes, bolts get pulled out in tension, it's just not as common as shear. The first one actually broke the rock, which is interesting because I thought it was pretty good granite.
Mm-hmm.
You
It
know,
was good granite.
it is. It's
Yeah.
what I'm used to in the Sierras, right? And then the second one, around the same force, snapped the head off. And the last test also snapped the head off. And it's interesting. It's about where the granite was failing. Rocks can fail, and it's not always the strength of the bolt that you're trying to achieve by using a longer bolt or a fatter bolt. It's how it engages with the rock, because you need it to hold on to the rock, and you need the rock to hold on to the rocks it's currently attached to. Because if the rock comes off, you're dead.
Ryan tried these same bolts in sandstone.
So that first one actually doesn't have much damage to the rock. It just completely pulled out. But then the second one took the rock with it as it came out. But the bolt's just basically pulling out. In softer rock, you're supposed to use longer bolts.
And thicker.
And thicker. And this was basically the smallest one they make. And don't take one pull as the gospel, it's Bolting Bible, as the gospel of how it's going to perform if loaded to 2 kilonewtons thousands of times as people are using it. That's a very different result. So next we tested these also in tension, and what we got was the rock failing. Because the rock, the force that's, oh, stay here, stay. They say show, don't tell. This is literally that bolt.
Does it have a number on it?
It doesn't have a number on it,
Okay. Yeah.
but it's one of those few. You can see that the shape of the rock here is the way the force is being dispersed through the rock. It creates this cone shape, and you can actually, this just makes such a great visual of how it's happening. So when two bolts are too close to each other, they're both fighting against the same rock area.
So if that was much deeper and it's engaging much lower, this is going to look very different or break the bolt.
Yeah, because the cone's going to be just, 3-4 times more rock. I've been hanging on to those for like 2 years just for that one moment to share that. Okay. Yeah, so the strength of the bolt is there-ish. It's just not the rock.
Not great for that rock.
And that's crazy. Like, we're getting below 10 kilonewtons with the rock failing. Like, you can generate that if you take a big enough whipper with a big enough person with a factor 1.8 fall. Anyways, not very high. So the last one we tested in limestone was 1/2 inch by 2.25 inch, the short one. And it broke the hanger at the point that it contacted the bolt. Usually it breaks where the carabiner is pulling through it. And it was full strength, even though it was short, and it was pretty strong at 34.83. We don't know how strong the bolt is if the hanger keeps breaking. And nothing matters once you're over about 25 kilonewtons. It's all super good enough. Why do you have to make 100 videos and a whole bolting Bible? Just tell me what bolt to use. If you find the unicorn bolt that works for every situation, let us know, and we'll make a video about it. There is no perfect bolt. This is not perfect. there might be a place for these. Stainless. This has pros and cons. Wedge bolts have pros and cons, and glue-ins have pros and cons. Have a holistic plan on how you're going to develop a route or what you're going to use it for, and think about maintenance and future removal. Go read the Bolting Bible. We've got, I think, 100 videos now on that thing, and completely revamped it with all the sports separated in the New Testament and all the general thoughts in the Old Testament. Please put a comment below if you made it all the way through the end of a video with 40 brake tests about bolts. You deserve one of these. But since you don't get one, click ours.